So I wonder what you thought about. Was it a nice, juicy mistake? Did you think of a good one? Now, if you ever wind up seated next to me for a meal, a dinner or something, you don't even have to preface anything. Just go ahead and tell me what you came up with. Your juiciest, meatiest mistake. I love hearing the answers to this question. Accomplishments are so passé, they're so 2024. Everybody's got something we can brag about, but mistakes, that's a different question altogether. It takes trust to talk about the things we've gotten wrong. It takes a bit of courage to do that as well. And it is an act of intimacy to expose those parts of ourselves where we've gotten something wrong, we've morally or ethically fallen down perhaps, or had some kind of lapse. Yeah, so I love hearing about mistakes, in part because not only are they acts of intimacy and vulnerability, they also, where you wind up on the other side, hopefully there's been some learning, there's been some growth, there's been some evolution. They shine a light on character. What did you learn and grow? How did you grow and what did you learn about the situation? Now, as a minister, that I find incredibly compelling. So would you like to hear one of mine? Yes. A really juicy one? You know, this is a little embarrassing. It's an embarrassing one. Now, if you are a regular-ish attendee here, you will have heard me preach probably on occasion, and I will draw on mistakes that I've made as examples in my own preaching, and I do this quite intentionally. One, it humanizes the pulpit. I am not up here as some model of perfection or omniscience. I am as human as each of you, and I get things wrong. The other is the universalization that happens when we start acknowledging mistakes. All of us have gotten things wrong, and we can relate to that. We can relate to the experience of having gotten something wrong. So my kind of juicy, somewhat embarrassing mistake, it's about racial justice, which isn't great. None of us want to get something wrong that's related to racial justice. This was in 2014, 11 years ago. It's something remarkable to me. Time has flown. Just a year earlier, in 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement was being birthed. And then in Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown is murdered at the hands of law enforcement. Protests are underway in Missouri, and at the same time as those protests, there are some civil disturbances, some that turn violent. The press was referring to these civil disturbances as race riots. Now, I'm talking about mainstream press, like CNN, NBC, like major outlets using the language of race riots. And I had just kind of imbibed this. This was part of what I was hearing, reading, and I repeated the language that I had been hearing and reading in these press reports as part of my reflections on a Sunday morning related to current events, some aspect of current events. And I referred to the disturbances that were occurring as race riots. A Black congregant of mine with relationship with ties to Metro St. Louis was very, very, very upset with me. We'll return to this vignette in a few moments. Now, what I'd like to share with you is, I've had the real pleasure in the past year. I've found amazing, amazing authors and books and resources. They keep just falling from the sky. One of them is from our own denomination. If you are not familiar with this book, I'm going to share a bit about it with you today. It's called On Repentance and Repair, Making Amends in an Unapologetic World. It's by Rabbi Danya Rutenberg. And it's published by one of our two denominational publishing houses. We have two. One's called Skinner House. They've published some of my books. The other's called Beacon Press. Beacon Press is historic and famous. They, at a time in the 70s when there was all this pressure for public publishers to not publish the Watergate papers, guess who did? It was us, the Unitarian Universalists, and it was our Beacon Press that published those papers. So Beacon Press is a historic press for justice matters, and they've published this book on repentance and repair. And Rabbi Ruttenberg's basic premise is that American society is not great at repair work when harm has occurred. This is kind of the basic idea that permeates the book. And I want to read just something from the opening pages to help bring this alive a little bit. She writes, "The challenges surrounding apologies and forgiveness, repentance and reconciliation, amends and atonement invite a lot of questions, and they're neither simple nor theoretical. They impact the very structure of our criminal justice system. They are ever present in our rapidly shifting conversation on sexual abuse. These questions haunt the legacies of every country touched by colonialism and white supremacy, and they hang painfully over our intimate bonds, our family and professional relationships, and our communities. And here in the United States, most of the time, we've gotten them very, very wrong. To put it bluntly, American society isn't very good at doing the work of repentance or repair." Now look at this, just the categories she names. You know, in our cultural setting here in U.S. society, we often conflate all these concepts. Just look at the breadth of this. Apologies and forgiveness and repentance and reconciliation and amends and atonement. We often relate to these ideas as if they're synonyms, and they are not in Jewish philosophy. They are each uniquely distinct concepts. So just notice the breadth of all those categories, and that they could be distinctly different from the other terms. So this is part of what makes it difficult for us to do repair and repentance work. We don't, generally speaking, in our society have a nuanced understanding of what repair and healing could look like. So Rabbi Ruttenberg, in feeling passionate about this topic and writing an entire book about it, draws on a famous Jewish philosopher by the name of Maimonides, who's a 12th century Jewish scholar, philosopher, and a physician. And just in that little bit of Maimonides' biography, you get some real beautiful richness. Here was an individual who was committed to not just the healing and the health and the repair of the physical body as a physician, but also the healing and the health and the repair of the soul or the spirit of a person when interpersonal harm has occurred. He was what I would call a humanistic Jewish philosopher. Now remember that definition of humanism. It's about human growth and our evolution, and through that growth and evolution, the exponential good we're able to bring alive and do in the world. And here was a philosopher interested in that very question, looking at how we can learn and grow through the things we get wrong. Now, Maimonides' system of repentance involves 5 steps. Sorry, it's not one of those triptychs of 3 things. He had 5 things. And his first step is, he says, the hardest. And by the way, the first step, you haven't even begun the journey. There's many more steps after the first one. So the first one alone is potentially the hardest. You may not begin the journey if you can't get to this step, which is about confession. It's about admission. It's about naming and owning harm. This is so hard, and we can all relate to this. When we inadvertently get something wrong, our defenses go up. Somebody brings something up to us, and we know we've been trying to live day to day, moment to moment in the best way possible. So how did we get this thing wrong? Well, it must be. The other person must be overly sensitive to whatever the issue or the subject matter is. It probably has something more to do with them than it has to do with us. This, by the way, becomes replicated. The individual struggle with defensiveness gets replicated in our society up to and including at corporate and legalistic levels. The denial, the defensiveness and denial that we naturally and instinctively feel on an individual level, corporately and legally, it becomes deny and defend. It's an actual strategy. If an organization is accused of messing something up, you deny that anything incorrect ever happened, and you defend the rationale and the logic that existed. And if that isn't good enough and legal measures are pursued, you can continue to deny and just settle out of court where there's no admission of wrongdoing at all. So this defensiveness is a very natural human instinct. We don't want to be wrong about something. And certainly when it came to Ferguson, I didn't want to be wrong about something racial justice related. I'm deeply committed to racial justice. Now in addition to the defensiveness and denying, we can be so rich in this denial category, including the recital of credentials that prove that we couldn't possibly have gotten something wrong. Now, I didn't actually do this, but I thought this, that, I'm the former president of the Unitarian Universalism's National People of Color organization. Like, I've gotten something wrong related to racial justice. I have worked for, at this time, decades to advance racial justice within Unitarian Universalism. And by the way, at this point in time, I've got 2 black kids. So this is personal. This is also about my commitment for my own children, that I hold for my own children and for my family. Now, I didn't say those things out loud, but you better believe I thought them. I thought them a lot. I didn't want to admit that I might have gotten something wrong. Now, Rabbi Ruttenberg offers throughout her book it's somewhat simple solution to this, but it's hard. It's hard to live into, and we know this because we've all grappled with this in some way, shape, or form. But basically, I'll summarize chapters for you. Rabbi Ruttenberg says, get over yourself. I should get over myself. Get over the denial and the defensiveness. Can we just simply ask ourselves, is it possible I missed something? Maybe I did. I don't think I did, but maybe. What if I did? What if I did? I have to listen first. I have to actually listen. Otherwise, I won't know whether I missed something or I didn't miss something. So staying open to merely the possibility is part of that first step. But from there, you actually then have to do the additional work of, okay, maybe you listen and you hear, and then you start to understand, oh, I think I might have missed something. I might have not gotten something right. Rabbi Ruttenberg tells us that admission of the mistake is an important part, so not just the possibility, but then getting to the fact that, yeah, I guess I did get something wrong. And the admission of it should be as public as whatever the mistake was. So if it was just one-on-one, we're having a private conversation, I messed something up, I can privately offer the correction. I went back and I realized, I was totally wrong. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. But if it's public, as is what I'm doing right now, is what I did back in 2014, then perhaps the admission of making a mistake should be as public as what occurred. And think of all the more normal than the extremes or the gradations in between of group conversations or workplace conversations by the coffee cooler, whatever it might be. The admission and the work of repair should be as public as whatever initially occurred. Now from there, getting to step 2, admitting that there was a mistake, which includes intrinsically owning it, that there was something wrong, we simply begin the work of personal change and or institutional or organizational change. Now in our society, the focus of mistakes and getting things wrong is often apology and forgiveness. That overly simplistic, unnuanced understanding or approach to mistakes doesn't tell us a thing about what the person who got something wrong is actually going to do in their lives afterwards. Did they actually understand the conversation about the mistake? Did they then integrate it into their lives? Are they actually going to do anything different in their lives because of reflection on the mistake that's happened? We don't know. And yet in American society, the emphasis and what we tend to do is simply apology and forgiveness. So in contrast to that, Jewish philosophy holds this second step as the primary work, and it's work that is often over a significant amount of time. The institution, Maimonides says, or person, must become the kind of person or place where the thing that happened would not be repeated if similar circumstances were to occur. That in the future, at some point in the future, if a similar situation came up, that person or that group or that organization would make a completely different decision or a choice, one that reflects evolution and learning. Now, to get to that takes time. That takes time. And in this Jewish philosophical framework, we're not even talking about apology yet. We're simply talking about some of the work one has to do themselves to move towards apology. So in this situation that I was in over a decade ago, I had to go out and learn about Black perspectives on Ferguson, and I have done a lot of work learning about Black history here in the United States. And as I dug into that, I began to appreciate how the framing of protests as riots becomes an excuse or a justification for requiring police intervention, which historically has shut down the ability of Black folk and others to protest injustice that is directed at them. The language of race riots justifies a PR narrative that allows law enforcement to be used as a tool of suppression and oppression. Now, what I've learned even in addition to that is that I need to be mindful, it needs to be in my tool chest, that I will interrogate the framing choices that others are making when they're talking about public events. It means when I'm hearing journalists or broadcasters and they're describing purportedly the news, I will listen to the word choices. I will pay attention to how those choices are framed and what the implications of those choices might be. Now, this work, which can take a lot of time, it is the work of growth and evolution. It moves us towards step 3 and step 4, Maimonides offers, and Rabbi Rottenberg as well, that these can happen kind of closer together. They're a bit related. Step 3 is restitution or amends, and step 4 is apology. And Maimonides' approach, it's humbling when you read about it. If you get into this book, which I encourage, it's humbling to read about it. It is absolutely victim or harmed-centric. The person who experienced the thing that hurt them, they get to decide what amends looks like, what healing looks like, what the situation requires for healing and repair. Not the person who got the thing wrong, but the other person or community or whatever the case may be. And you keep at it until you get there. So, the language that's used, the Hebraic translations of it, it's like begging for forgiveness and begging for simply the opportunity to offer amends. And you stay with it and you keep at it until it's repair and healing is achieved. Look at the premium that this Jewish philosophy places on relationship. Whatever is needed to repair relationship, that is the commitment. That's how you show up, with that front and center. I am willing to do whatever is reasonably needed for repair and healing. So, both months and years of conversation ensued on my end with the congregant who brought up the mistake that I made. And in the space of months, the focus on the shorter time frame was interpersonal healing. How can our relationship be in a better place? Harm was not just public, it was also interpersonal. And in the frame of years, my ongoing growth has continued around all of this. I understand now that I have an obligation to make sure that if I'm going to talk about something from the pulpit on a Sunday morning, I better make sure that I have taken the time to understand the nuance and complexity of the issue. And that often means intentionally seeking out opinions and perspectives that I don't necessarily agree with so that I can understand what those other ways of looking at an issue are. That's a tall order. Most of us don't go about day-to-day life intentionally trying to do that, and yet I've come to understand that for my work, it is necessary. That particular congregant from back then has had the chance to see my personal growth over time, over the space of many years, and has had a chance to witness that I've owned the mistake that I made and that I've talked about it publicly on numerous occasions, including today. And in fact, my choice of choosing it as an example of a mistake today, I had many that I could have chosen from, probably 2 or 3 mistakes this past week alone, but it's an intentional choice of continued amends around a topic that I care deeply about. Step 5. Now, if we've done all this repair and healing work, all these other steps, step 5, by the time we get to it, should be easy, but it's what Maimonides in contemporary language might call the proof of the pudding. Are you actually going to make a different choice? So when a similar set of circumstances come up again, are you transformed? Have you evolved and grown? Is there tangible proof and evidence of that? That's how we know that we've done the real work of repentance. I noticed a couple of years ago as our society began to focus on Israel in Gaza, listening to the news reports in those early days was very, very painful and difficult for me. And a lot of the difficulty and pain was around the language and the framing that was being used in supposedly news broadcasts. And it was so upsetting to me that at some point I tried to switch off of US news reports and switch to the BBC, and it was just as bad, if not even worse. And when I stepped back a little bit, I could see that, I'm now noticing this. And it's automatic. I'm noticing the language that is supposedly used in news broadcasts around in describing an issue, in framing an issue for the rest of us as the public, and I'm interrogating and questioning the lens being used, the analysis being used at arriving at specific framings. More broadly, I began to even notice that I'm paying attention to how newscasters and politicians and others, our culture writ large, how they characterize, frame, and talk about protest movements. And it is very telling. Our society has very specific relationships to protest movements and what we think about them, whether we respect them or we don't respect them, and the language that will be brought to bear. There is so much more that I could share with you about Rabbi Ruttenberg's thesis, but I'll just place some appetizers or some additional things to whet your appetite. We've spoken a bit about the obligations of the individual who's done harm. Now, Rabbi Ruttenberg also goes into a bit of the person who's experienced harm, the things that are possible there, none of which are obligatory, but are possible. Things like pardon and forgiveness and reconciliation. And in Jewish philosophy, these are different concepts. They are not, again, synonyms of the same thing. Pardon being different from forgiveness, being different from reconciliation. Goes on to talk about, and this was great fun for me to discover, Rabbi Ruttenberg's has a case study that specifically involves University of Michigan's Michigan Medicine. And it is fun, and it is a positive one, so I'm going to leave it in there to kind of hold your attention and maybe draw you to the book. I will be using that this book in my adult programming next year. So if you opt in the year ahead to take an adult class with me, this will be one of the books we're going to look at more closely. So this Jewish framework of repentance and repair in the midst of harm, it is so rich, it is so nuanced, It is so thoughtful, and it makes sense when you look at the history of the Jewish people as a people who've lived as a minority in other people's countries for the most part. The thought of what harm is and how you work through it to healthy relationship, it makes sense that the Jewish folk have given such deep thought to this. And we ourselves, as a people who are committed to humanism, we are committed to the experience of learning and growing and being the best that we can be in the world, contributing to human flourishing writ large. It's through the work of repairing harm and repairing mistakes or breaches that we can support not just our own ongoing growth, but we can help ensure that our circles of human connection remain whole, that they remain unbroken. I invite you to hold that with me as a commitment in the days ahead.